Some stories stay with you forever, creeping into your thoughts when you least expect it. Sometimes it's an object, a painting, a doll, or even a ring that carries a darkness we can't understand. Other times, it's a place, a quiet road, a hospital hallway, or somewhere unexpected that hides shadows we don't want to see. These aren't just stories to scare you. They're warnings, like a painting that seems to come alive, its shadows stretching into the real world, or a doll that whispers at night and moves on its own, or a road that traps drivers in an endless loop, leading them nowhere, a hospital wing where a shadow waits for anyone who dares to step closer, and a ring that brings nightmares, bruises, and something far worse. What would you do if you found yourself in these situations? Would you run? Would you face it? Or would you try to forget, hoping it never comes back? These are the accursed paranormal events no one can explain, and you might never look at the world the same way again. I've always loved exploring antique shops. There's something fascinating about the old, forgotten things you can find, but this one time, I wish I hadn't gone in. It was a grey, rainy afternoon, and I stumbled upon a tiny shop tucked away downtown. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old wood, and the shelves were crammed with everything from teacups to rusted tools. In the back corner, something caught my eye, a painting leaning against the wall. It showed a peaceful countryside with a stone cottage, a pond, and a large tree casting long shadows. At first, it looked beautiful, but the shadows didn't seem right. They were too dark, too alive. The shopkeeper appeared beside me. She was an older woman with sharp eyes, and she seemed uneasy. "Interested in that one?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "It's nice," I said. "How much?" She hesitated. "I'll give it to you for cheap. The last owner didn't want it anymore." "Why not?" I asked. She looked at the painting, then back at me. They didn't say. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I bought it and brought it home. I hung the painting in my living room above the couch. It fit perfectly. I spent the evening admiring it and thought I'd made a great find. That night I woke up to a faint sound. It was like a whisper, soft and hard to make out. I froze, listening, but it stopped after a few seconds. I figured it was my imagination and went back to sleep. The next morning, something about the painting looked different. The shadows beneath the tree seemed darker, like they had spread a little further. Must be the lighting, I told myself. But things got weirder. Each night, I started hearing whispers again. At first, they were faint, like the rustle of leaves. But soon, I realized they were words, spoken in a language I couldn't understand. And it wasn't just the whispers. The air in my apartment felt colder, and I smelled faint traces of smoke, like a fire had burned out long ago. Every time I looked at the painting, the shadows seemed to change. They stretched further across the scene, creeping toward the cottage. I tried convincing myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then came the footsteps. Late at night, I'd hear slow, deliberate footsteps moving from the living room to the hallway outside my bedroom. I was too scared to check, so I'd lie there, holding my breath until they stopped. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned on all the lights and walked into the living room. The shadows in the painting were darker than ever, swirling and shifting like they were alive. I woke up one night to freezing cold air. My breath fogged in front of me, and the whispers were louder than ever, echoing through the apartment. I opened my bedroom door, and the living room was pitch black, except for the painting. It seemed to glow faintly, and shadows spilled out of the frame, pooling on the floor. Then they began to rise. The shadows twisted and stretched until they formed a tall figure with no face, just darkness. And then it spoke. It said my name. I stumbled back, shaking. The figure stepped closer, slow and deliberate, its voice echoing as it whispered my name again. I grabbed the painting off the wall and ran to the door. Without thinking, I threw it outside. The glass shattered as it hit the ground. The figure stopped at the doorway, its form unraveling like smoke. For a moment, everything was silent. Then I heard it again, my name whispered faintly in the darkness. The next morning, the painting was gone. Not broken, not lying on the ground, just gone. I moved out of that apartment a week later. But even now, whenever I pass by an antique shop, I hear faint whispers calling my name. And I wonder if the painting is waiting for someone else to find it. When my GPS glitched and rerouted me down an empty country road, I thought nothing of it at first. It was late, and I was driving home after a long day. The highway was dark and quiet, and I was exhausted. The steady hum of the engine was lulling me into a daze when my GPS suddenly beeped. Recalculating, it said, before rerouting me onto a side road I didn't recognize. I frowned. I'd driven this route before and didn't remember ever needing a detour. The new road was narrow, lined with fields on either side. There were no lights, just the faint outline of trees in the distance and the pale beams of my headlights. Shortcut, I muttered, trusting the GPS. What could go wrong? About 10 minutes in, I noticed a sign by the side of the road. It was old and wooden, with faded symbols painted in white. The writing didn't look like any language I recognized, just sharp, angular shapes. I slowed the car, squinting at it, but kept driving. A few miles later, I saw another sign. This one looked newer, like someone had repainted the symbols recently. The road felt like it was going on forever, stretching endlessly into the dark. My GPS kept recalculating, and I started feeling uneasy. Out of nowhere, the radio clicked on. I hadn't touched it. At first, it was just static, but then I started hearing faint whispers. They were soft, overlapping, and too quiet to make out. I reached for the dial, trying to turn it off, but it wouldn't respond. The whispers grew louder, filling the car with eerie, indecipherable words. "Stop it," I muttered, gripping the wheel. As suddenly as it started, the sound cut off, leaving me in silence again. My relief didn't last long. In the rearview mirror, I saw headlights. Another car. Finally. But something about the lights felt off. They flickered, dimming and flaring up randomly, like they couldn't decide whether to stay on. I slowed down, expecting the car to pass me. But when I stopped, the headlights disappeared. I stared into the mirror, heart racing. The road behind me was empty. I started driving again, but everything felt wrong. The fields looked darker, the air felt colder, and no matter how far I drove, the scenery didn't change. The road began to loop. I passed the same strange sign 3 times, its symbols glowing faintly in the dark. The whispers returned, louder now. "Don't stop," one voice said softly. "They see you," another added, lower and raspier. I tried to shake it off, but my hands were trembling. In the rearview mirror, the flickering headlights reappeared. This time, they were closer. My panic peaked when I saw the fog. It rolled in quickly, thick and heavy, blocking the road ahead. My headlights barely pierced through it. I slowed the car to a crawl, my breathing uneven. The headlights behind me grew brighter, closer. I stopped, frozen in fear. The other car didn't vanish this time. Instead, its engine rumbled louder as it pulled up behind me. I couldn't see the driver, but I heard the car door creak open, and then I saw it, a shadowy figure stepping out of the car. It was tall and thin, its movements slow and jerky. I slammed my foot on the gas, tires screeching as I sped into the fog. The mist swallowed my car, blinding me. The whispers returned, frantic and overlapping. "Don't stop. Keep going." I gripped the wheel tightly, pushing the gas pedal harder. Suddenly the fog cleared, and I burst onto a familiar highway. The road behind me was empty. I pulled into a gas station and sat there for a long time, shaking. My mind couldn't make sense of what had happened. A week later, I saw something that sent chills through me. A sign had appeared on a street near my home. It was just like the ones I'd seen on that cursed road, with the same strange symbols painted on it. As I walked past it, I swear I heard faint whispers. My sister loved collecting dolls. She had dozens, but one in particular always felt wrong. Growing up, my sister Emily was obsessed with dolls. Her room was full of them: porcelain dolls, rag dolls, and even those creepy modern ones that laugh or cry. Most of them didn't bother me, but one of them wasn't like the others. She found it at a yard sale when we were kids. I remember her running into the house, holding it up like it was the best thing she'd ever bought. "Look," she said, smiling. The doll had a cracked porcelain face, a faded pink dress, and glassy blue eyes that seemed too real. I hated it immediately. There was something about the way it stared that made my skin crawl. Emily placed the doll on her shelf, but it never felt like it belonged there. Every time I went into her room, I felt its eyes follow me. "Don't you think it's creepy?" I asked her one day. "It's just a doll," she said, rolling her eyes. But it wasn't just a doll. I started noticing little things. The doll always seemed to be in a slightly different position. Its head would tilt or its arms would move. I asked Emily about it, but she always insisted she hadn't touched it. "You're imagining things," she'd say. But I knew better. Then it got worse. Sometimes the doll would show up in different parts of the house, on the living room couch, at the dining table, even in my room. "Emily!" I yelled the first time I found it sitting on my desk. She swore she hadn't moved it. My parents said the same. And then the whispers started. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd hear a faint voice. It was soft, almost like a breeze, but it wasn't natural. One night I followed the sound to Emily's room. She was fast asleep, but the doll was sitting on her dresser, its head tilted toward the door. I stood there, frozen, listening to the faint murmurs coming from nowhere. The worst night came when I woke up and found the doll at the foot of my bed. Its head was turned toward me, its cracked face tilted in a way that almost looked like a smile. "Emily!" I screamed. She came rushing in, looking groggy and annoyed. "What's wrong?" I pointed at the doll. "Why is it here? Did you put it there?" Her face went pale. "I didn't touch it," she whispered. That's when she finally admitted it. She'd heard the whispers too, but didn't say anything because she thought I'd laugh at her. "We need to get rid of it," I said. This time, she didn't argue. The next day, we drove to the woods near our house. Emily carried the doll like it was something dangerous. We dug a hole and buried it deep, not saying a word as we covered it with dirt. Walking back to the car, everything felt eerily silent. No birds, no wind, just an unsettling stillness. I started to feel relieved as we drove home, but halfway there, the whispers came back. They were louder now, angrier, like the doll knew what we'd done. Emily looked at me, her face pale. "Do you hear that?" I nodded, gripping the steering wheel. We never went back to those woods, and for years, Emily didn't collect any more dolls. But years later, when I visited her new house, I saw that she had started collecting again. Her shelves were filled with porcelain dolls just like before. As we talked, I scanned the room, and that's when I saw it. A doll in a faded pink dress with a cracked face and glassy blue eyes. It was staring right at me. What would you have done if the doll showed up at your bed? Burned it, buried it, or... Hospitals always felt unsettling to me, but I never imagined I'd leave one questioning reality. It started when I went to visit my friend Jason in the hospital. He'd had a routine surgery, and I promised to stop by and keep him company. Hospitals always made me uncomfortable. The bright, sterile hallways felt cold and lifeless, and the faint hum of machines made it worse. but I figured I'd get in and out quickly. The receptionist told me Jason's room was on the 3rd floor. "Take the elevator and head left," she said. I found the elevator easily, but when I got off, I must have taken a wrong turn. Instead of the busy, well-lit area I expected, I ended up in a quieter wing. This part of the hospital felt different. The air was heavy, and the hallway was dim. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting strange shadows on the walls. I kept walking, thinking I'd find my way back, but the room numbers didn't make any sense. That's when I saw it, a shadow just at the edge of my vision. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. I shook it off and kept going, but my unease grew. The air felt colder, and the walls seemed older here with peeling paint and a faint metallic smell. Then I heard it. Soft, faint sobbing. It was coming from one of the rooms. I froze, listening. The sound was unmistakable. A woman crying. I peeked inside the room expecting to see someone, but it was empty. The sobbing stopped as soon as I stepped in. My heart was racing, and I backed out quickly, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the feeling that something was watching me wouldn't go away. Further down the hallway, I saw a nurse walking toward me. Relief flooded over me. I could finally get directions back. "Excuse me," I said. "I think I got lost." She stopped, looking at me with concern. "What are you doing here?" "I was trying to find my friend's room," I said. Her expression hardened. "You shouldn't be in this wing," she said, her voice low. I frowned. "I just took a wrong turn." "Don't go down that hallway," she interrupted, glancing over her shoulder. I followed her gaze to a darker hallway at the end of the wing. The lights there flickered rapidly, and the air seemed colder even from where I stood. Before I could ask more, she hurried off, disappearing around a corner. As I stood there, unsure of what to do, I heard voices from a nearby nurses' station. 2 staff members were speaking quietly. "Someone saw it again last night," one of them said. The other sighed. "They should just shut this wing down for good. It's where that patient disappeared, isn't it?" "Yeah, room 324. They said he walked into the hallway and never came back." A chill ran down my spine. Were they talking about the same hallway the nurse had warned me about? I should have walked away, but I couldn't help myself. Curiosity got the better of me, and I started toward the dark hallway. The air grew colder with every step, and the flickering lights made the shadows on the walls look like they were moving. As I got closer, the sobbing started again. This time, it was louder, echoing down the hallway. I stopped in my tracks when I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, a shadow moved. It was tall and human-shaped, but wrong. Its edges blurred, and it seemed to shimmer like it wasn't fully there. The figure started moving toward me. My heart pounded, and I backed away, trying not to panic. As it got closer, the lights began to flicker faster until the hallway was plunged into darkness. The sobbing grew louder, surrounding me. I turned and ran. When I finally made it back to the main area, everything looked normal again. The lights were steady, the hallways busy, and the air felt warm. I stood there, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A nurse approached me. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I got lost," I said weakly. "I think I need to sit down." When I finally made it to Jason's room, he looked up and smiled. "Took you long enough," he joked. I didn't laugh. After a while, I told him what happened. As I described the hallway and the shadow, his expression changed. When I finished, he stared at me, pale. "I saw that hallway in my dreams last night," he whispered. What would you have done if you saw a shadow in the hallway? Kept walking, turned back, or something else? When my grandmother passed, I inherited her wedding ring. I wish I hadn't. I was really close to my grandmother, so when she passed, it felt like a part of me was gone too. Among her things was her wedding ring, a simple gold band with a faint engraving I couldn't quite make out. Wearing it made me feel connected to her, like I was keeping her memory alive. I put it on the day after the funeral and rarely took it off. At first, it brought me comfort. But then the nightmares started. Not long after I started wearing the ring, I began having the same terrifying dream every night. I was buried alive. I'd feel the weight of dirt pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. And then there were the hands, cold, bony fingers grabbing my wrists, pulling me deeper. I'd wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. At first, I thought it was just grief messing with my mind. But the dreams wouldn't stop. One morning, as I was getting dressed, I noticed bruises on my wrists. They were faint, like someone had grabbed me. I stared at them, trying to figure out how they got there. I lived alone, and there was no way I could have done it to myself. Over the next few days, more bruises appeared, always in the same spots, my wrists and fingers, as if someone had been holding me down. I started to feel uneasy, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The ring, which had once made me feel close to my grandmother, felt wrong. It was always cold, no matter how warm it was outside. It felt heavier too, like it didn't belong on my hand anymore. One night, I woke up in a panic. Something was pressing down on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. My hands felt numb, and when I looked at them, I saw dark bruises forming on my fingers. I struggled to move, and with all my strength, I ripped the ring off my finger. The weight on my chest disappeared instantly. I sat up, gasping for air, clutching the ring in my shaking hand. "I need to get rid of this," I whispered. The next morning, I drove to a nearby river. Standing on the bank, I stared at the ring one last time. It felt impossibly heavy, like it didn't want to leave. Without thinking, I threw it into the water. The ring sank with a small splash, disappearing into the current. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again, but the relief didn't last long. A few days later, I noticed a bruise on my wrist. It was faint, but unmistakable. Thin, finger-shaped marks, just like before. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but deep down, I knew better. Weeks passed, and I tried to move on. Then, one afternoon, I was sitting in a coffee shop when I saw something that froze me in place. A stranger sat a few tables away, their hands wrapped around a mug. On their finger was a gold ring. It was the same one. The stranger looked up at me, their eyes empty and cold. I left my coffee unfinished, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the ring wasn't truly gone, and somehow I knew it never would be. Have you ever owned something that gave you bad vibes or seemed to bring bad luck? If these stories gave you chills, make sure to like, share, and comment with your own experiences. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what could have been behind these events.